My 47-year-old husband, on his deathbed, chose to confess to me. He said the daughter we raised was not my child, but his sister-in-law's. Back then, while I was unconscious after giving birth, he swapped my child with his sister-in-law's. But his sister-in-law's child developed a high fever at the age of 6. Due to delayed medical treatment, the child's brain was damaged. Perhaps my expression was truly dreadful. He wept bitterly in repentance, saying he was sorry to me, and if there were a next life, he would still be willing to marry me, spending a lifetime to make it up to me. He has schemed against me for a lifetime, and yet he dares to think about the next life? Only those who are useless would look forward to a non-existent rebirth and revenge in the next life. As for me, I usually settle scores right on the spot. Moreover, how could he not have noticed all these years? In what way does the child resemble him or his sister-in-law? After Eric received the test report from the hospital, he locked himself in the study as soon as he returned and didn't come out for the entire afternoon. I knew he was feeling terrible, so I didn't disturb him. Not long after, the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, and standing outside was Eric's sister-in-law, Linda, with her daughter behind her, the girl who had become intellectually disabled after a high fever at the age of 6. Linda furrowed her brow, and the first thing she said upon seeing me was, "Has Susan come back?" Susan is my daughter, 22 years old and still in college. I shook my head. She hasn't. Then, curious, I asked, "What's wrong?" Linda ignored me, pushing past me into the living room as if she were right at home. I pulled Sarah, who was standing at the door, inside as well, and when I turned around, I saw Linda sitting on the sofa, arms crossed, watching us. "Nancy, from my angle, you and Sarah actually look a bit alike." Her gaze toward me was not friendly, and the corners of her mouth held a faint, ambiguous smile. I didn't respond. This wasn't the first time she had said that Sarah resembled me. We have no blood relation at all, so how could her daughter possibly look like me? I had just sat down opposite Linda when she impatiently continued questioning. "Eric is already in this state, and you still plan to keep it from Susan?" Eric's test results had only been in hand for a little over 2 hours, and Linda already knew everything so quickly? Before I could answer, the study door opened, and Eric, who had shut himself in his room since returning, finally came out. His gaze fell on Linda, his lips trembling slightly, but in the end, he couldn't bring himself to call out the word sister-in-law. Today's follow-up report confirmed Eric's illness. Advanced stage lung cancer, with symptoms of metastasis and spread already present. He has missed the optimal window for treatment, and his life is now down to its final few months. The two locked eyes for a moment before Linda spoke first. "Eric, I still think we shouldn't keep this from Susan. She is your daughter. Don't you agree?" She emphasized the words "your daughter." Eric remained silent for a long while before finally saying, "We shouldn't keep it from her." The two of them went back and forth, occasionally exchanging glances, completely ignoring me as if I were invisible. I pretended not to notice. I didn't care about such things when I was young. And now, with someone who is nearing the end of his life, what is there to be angry about? Eric had almost no close relatives left. His parents and older brother had long since passed away. Apart from me and our daughter, there were only his sister-in-law, Linda, and her daughter, Sarah. Seeing that Eric was about to call Susan, I stepped forward to stop him. "Susan will be on summer break in just half a month. It won't make much difference to wait a few more days." Eric pondered for a moment, then nodded and put away his phone. Linda's expression darkened as she glanced at me. "As a mother, you're quite controlling, aren't you?" I smiled. What parent doesn't think about their child's well-being? "That's true," she said pointedly. "It's a shame about my own fool. Even if I wanted to plan for her, it wouldn't do much good." Sarah, sitting next to me, was playing with her fingers with her head down, carefree, in stark contrast to her mother's calculating eyes. "That sounds nice, but what has she ever planned for Sarah? A woman in her 20s with a buzz cut, wearing ill-fitting clothes, her face and body tanned dark, looking nothing like a girl at all. Eric walked over and sat on the same side of the sofa as Linda, with a person's distance between them. Since everyone was here, I asked Eric, "How do you want to proceed with the treatment?" Eric pinched the bridge of his nose, looking utterly dejected. "Haven't figured it out yet." His complexion was terrible. Ever since the diagnosis, it was as if all his vitality had been drained from him. Linda kept her head down, playing with her phone, as if she hadn't heard what we were saying. Perhaps to prevent patients from losing the will to live, doctors' words are always ambiguous. He would not directly tell the patient that the disease is incurable, nor would he say that it can be cured. Instead, he would give the patient the illusion that as long as they receive proper treatment, there is still a possibility of recovery. Eric has already been misled by this illusion. Over the years, he has accumulated some savings from his business, so the cost of treatment in the later stages would not be a major issue if he decided to proceed. At this point in the conversation, Linda suddenly chimed in, "I think conservative treatment is still the way to go. That way, you won't have to suffer too much." Eric's face looked even more ashen. Conservative treatment, in his eyes, must have been equivalent to giving up on treatment. He usually listened to Linda, but when it came to matters concerning his own life, it was different. No matter how much one usually claims not to fear death, when truly facing the brink of death, there is always an unknown fear deep within. When that unknown fear is amplified, a person develops a strong desire to survive. Linda said she would stay at my house, on the grounds that she was afraid I couldn't take care of Eric alone, and as his sister-in-law, she wanted to stay and help me. Eric didn't speak, turning to look at me as if seeking my opinion. I really did have work to attend to, and I had originally planned to hire a caregiver to look after Eric. With Linda offering herself, I had no reason to refuse. "Then I'll trouble you, sister-in-law." Linda pursed her lips. "We're all family. No need to be so polite." Linda was indeed not one to stand on ceremony. That evening, she lay on the sofa, wearing a face mask while binge-watching a drama, and still found time to direct me to give her daughter a bath. She said, "I've completely forgotten how long it's been since the little fool had a bath. Nancy, why don't you just give her a quick wash while you're at it?" Sarah was watching TV, where a chase scene between a cat and a mouse could make her giggle for half the day. I still remember how smart and adorable this child was before she turned 6. To see her like this now, one can only say that having such a mother is her fate. Sarah and Susan were born on the same day, with Susan being 3 hours older than Sarah. Sarah hadn't finished watching the cartoon and struggled, unwilling to come with me. Linda glared at her with disgust and shouted, "Go take a bath." I clearly felt Sarah's body tremble violently. She crouched down, covered her head, and let out a loud scream. This is a common stress response after being frequently beaten. The noise in the living room was too loud, and Eric also came out of his room. He glanced at Sarah, who was crouching on the ground, holding her head and still screaming, then looked at Linda, somewhat impatiently. "Why are you yelling at her?" Linda snorted coldly. "I really regret not strangling her when she was born." While saying these things, she also glanced at me several times. I have been watching from the sidelines all along. Linda only has Sarah as her child in this lifetime, and how she chooses to treat her child is her own business. No one else has the right to interfere. After Eric's friends learned about his illness, they came to visit one after another. With so many people, it was inconvenient to eat at home, so I arranged a nearby hotel. All of them were longtime friends who had collaborated with Eric for years. They were considerate of his condition and only brought up topics that would make him happy, along with some fun memories from the past. During this time, I noticed that someone named Bruce seemed to know Linda. Their eyes met several times, and their expressions seemed to convey something between them. Bruce didn't leave a deep impression on me. He only started interacting with Eric a few years ago, and their friendship didn't seem particularly close. Even Eric was surprised that he showed up today. I observed them discreetly. During the meal, Linda went out for a while, and Bruce also excused himself to go to the restroom, quickly following her out. They weren't the only ones who left the table. Other friends also stepped out during the meal, so their departure didn't raise any suspicion. It took the two of them nearly 20 minutes to return, one after the other. After this return, Bruce's mood had clearly improved a lot, and he became much more talkative. During the conversation, whether intentionally or not, he even brought up the topic of assets. The atmosphere at the dinner table grew heavy because of this topic. The smile on Eric's face completely vanished, and his hand holding the chopsticks trembled uncontrollably. A friend sitting next to Bruce playfully punched him, trying to lighten the mood. Why bring that up? Our Eric is blessed with great fortune and a long life. As soon as these words were spoken, a chorus of agreement followed. Just as the atmosphere seemed to be taking a positive turn, Linda suddenly said, "He's not wrong, Eric. Even if you don't think about others, shouldn't you at least consider your child?" When she said others, her gaze swept over me, filled with malice. Eric and I both put down our chopsticks at the same time. There was no way we could continue this meal. I had 2 glasses of wine at the dinner table and went to bed early that night. I don't know how long I slept, but I was awakened by faint sounds of an argument. Linda and Eric were having a dispute. Whether in the living room or the study, I couldn't tell. I cracked the door of my room open a little and heard Susan's name mentioned, along with something about a will. What? Does Linda also want Eric to include her in his will and leave her a share of his assets? Over the years, Eric and I have each had our own careers. In addition to his job, Eric has also partnered with some friends to run a few businesses. I don't know whether they've been profitable or not, as we've never discussed our incomes with each other. The household expenses and Susan's costs have always been shared between us. I know that Eric has been secretly supporting Linda. With a child whose mental development is stuck at the level of a 5 or 6-year-old, it's true that she can't work. All these years, I've simply pretended not to know anything about it. The next day, Eric said he had made up his mind and was ready to follow the treatment plan given by the doctor. This was within my expectations, and I said, "Okay." After a moment of silence, Eric added, "Nancy, I want to make a will." I walked over and held his hand. "Eric, don't overthink it. Let's listen to the doctor and focus on getting better. We're not at that point yet." Eric's eyes were unusually red. He still insisted on making a will. He said, "We only have Susan as our child." He wanted to leave all the property to Susan and asked if I had any objections. Linda interjected with a sarcastic tone from the side. "Susan is her daughter. What opinion could she possibly have?" As she said this, her eyes were evasive, not daring to meet my gaze. I smiled and said, "Yes, Susan is my daughter, so of course I have no objections." As soon as these words were spoken, Eric and Linda visibly breathed a sigh of relief. During this period of actively receiving treatment, Eric was also consulting with a lawyer to draft a will. In just half a month, he had lost most of his hair, and his complexion was visibly deteriorating. I hired a caregiver to help Linda take care of Eric. Linda claimed she was helping me look after Eric, but she was used to her freedom. How could she possibly stay in the hospital? Moreover, it seemed she had taken up with another lover in the past 2 years, and the two were inseparable, completely infatuated with each other. Not only did she fail to come to the hospital to take care of Eric, but she also left Sarah for Eric and the caregiver to look after. Naturally, the caregiver was unhappy, and after complaining to me, I increased his salary. After all, the money for hiring the caregiver was paid by Eric. When I didn't see Linda at the hospital for the 3rd time, I asked Eric, "Has my sister-in-law not been coming to the hospital these past few days?" Eric had lost a significant amount of weight. His complexion was sallow, and his hair had thinned out, making him look like an old man, with none of the spirited demeanor he had before his illness. He shook his head, as if unwilling to talk too much about Linda. Over the years, Linda had found one lover after another outside, and Eric was not unaware of it, but he simply had no grounds to stop her. Now, he had neither the heart nor the strength to do so. I sat by the hospital bed and brought him 2 pieces of good news. The doctor said you can be discharged tomorrow, and Susan will also be back tomorrow. Upon hearing this, Eric's expression finally relaxed. He had long wanted to leave the hospital and had been waiting for Susan to return. On the day Susan returned, Linda, who hadn't been back for over a week, also came home, having just learned that her father was seriously ill. Susan cried for a long time in Eric's arms. Eric's eyes also reddened, but he continued to comfort her. Linda stood to the side, unusually at a loss for what to do. Like Eric, she had been comforting Susan the whole time, looking at her as if she were her own daughter. Susan wiped away her tears, then turned and took Linda's hand. She said, "Auntie, I heard you've been taking care of my dad all this time. Thank you for your hard work." Linda beamed with joy, her smile blooming like a flower. "Oh, you silly child. We're all family here. There's no need to talk about hard work." The three of them stood together, looking more like a family of three, which made me and Sarah seem like outsiders. During the 2 months of Susan's summer vacation at home, Linda also rarely went out. She would take care of Eric together with Susan. I often saw the three of them laughing and chatting together, and Eric's gaze would frequently fall on the two of them, his eyes filled with contentment. Time passed quickly. After Susan started school, Linda also left my home, only visiting occasionally. Eric's condition worsened day by day. His hair had fallen out completely by the 2nd month of chemotherapy. Susan bought him all sorts of wigs and hats. Eric mostly just looked at them and rarely wore them, as he hardly went out anymore. The severe weight loss and the pain from his illness made him increasingly reluctant to move. I always felt that Eric had been looking at me more and more strangely lately, as if he had done something wrong to me. What could he possibly have done to wrong me? He had already made a will, leaving all his property to my daughter, Susan. One day 3 months later, Eric, who had been unable to even drink water, suddenly said he was hungry, and his spirits suddenly improved. The caregiver hurriedly called me, asking me to come and see. Both she and I knew that Eric was experiencing a final rally. I had been away on a business trip for over half a month, using it as an excuse not to visit him until now. When I saw Eric, I was still taken aback for a moment. In just half a month, he had become so thin that he was practically skin and bones. I sat down in the caregiver's chair beside Eric's bed and asked him how he was feeling. Eric held my hand, his face so gaunt it seemed like only a thin layer of skin remained, and managed a faint smile. "I'm feeling much better. It's as if the strength I lost before has finally returned." The final rally. It's probably like this. All the organs in the body seem to have agreed to exert their last bit of strength together. How could Eric not know the condition of his own body? He looked at me for a long time, and suddenly tears fell. I heard him say, "Nancy, I'm sorry." He tightened his grip on my hand, but he didn't have much strength left anyway, so the force was just enough to hold my hand a little tighter. Eric said, "If I don't tell you these words, I won't be able to rest in peace even in death." This piqued my curiosity. "Eric, you didn't do anything to betray me, did you?" Eric avoided my gaze and, after a long pause, said, "Nancy, Susan is actually my child with Linda. Back then, while you were unconscious after giving birth, I swapped the 2 babies." I felt my vision darken, and it took me a long while to find my voice again. "Are you saying that Sarah is actually my daughter?" Eric lowered his head, not daring to look at me or respond. "But how could that be? When Susan was 12 years old, she and I had a paternity test done, and the results confirmed a biological relationship. I have always known that Eric doesn't like me. Back when his brother and my ex-husband died together in a mining accident, there were rumors about him and his sister-in-law. After my husband's death, my mother-in-law drove me back to my parents' home, blaming me for being a jinx and saying I was the one who caused her son's death. This was utterly ridiculous. It was she who had arranged for him to work in the coal mine through connections. Yet in the end, she pinned all the blame on me. I had only stayed at my parents' home for a few days when my sister-in-law started slamming things around, giving me dirty looks and speaking sarcastically. My mother, afraid of this sharp-tongued sister-in-law, only advised me to remarry quickly while I was still young. It was at that time that Eric's family sent a matchmaker to our door. Eric was already 25 that year, and his family was truly so poor they couldn't even put food on the table. What decent family would be willing to marry their daughter into such a household? When the matchmaker came to propose, my mother didn't hesitate much before agreeing. She had originally thought to ask for some bride price, but when she saw my belly, she couldn't bring herself to open her mouth. Before the wedding, I told Eric the truth. I had only discovered I was pregnant after my husband died. If Eric couldn't accept it, it was understandable. Eric hesitated for a long time but eventually agreed to marry me. At that time, his family had a poor reputation in the village. His father had passed away early. His mother suffered from a chronic illness and relied on medication year-round, and now even his older brother was gone. The villagers said that the location of his family's ancestral grave was bad, which was why their life was so difficult. If Eric didn't marry me, he would likely remain a bachelor for the rest of his life. Eric and I never even had a wedding banquet. He simply pinned a red flower on a borrowed bicycle, pulled me from my home to his, and that was how we got married. It was only after the wedding that I learned about Eric and his sister-in-law, Linda. At that time, I realized I had been deceived, but I had no other options. I didn't have a single cent to my name. My own family wouldn't take me in, and without Eric, I had nowhere to go. I muddled through the days one by one until I was over 2 months pregnant, and Linda also found out she was pregnant. Back then, I calculated it over and over again and finally realized that there was a high probability Linda's child was Eric's. I have never harbored any intention to harm others. So why are the people around me scheming against me one by one? A dying man speaks with kindness. Eric rambled on at length, confessing the foolish things he did in his youth. Did he truly regret doing these things? Of course not. He was merely hoping that if there really were judges in the underworld, they might lessen his sins. Eric's tears fell drop by drop on the back of my hand. He choked up, almost unable to speak. Nancy, I'm sorry for you and Sarah. If there's a next life, I'll marry you again, okay? I'm willing to spend a lifetime making it up to you and our child. He schemed against me for a lifetime, and even in his final moments, he was still paving the way for Linda. How could someone like him be worthy, and how dare he mention a next life to me? I pulled my hand from his grasp and wiped it clean with a wet wipe, finger by finger. So, you left all your property to Susan in your will, just because you knew she was your biological daughter? Eric has started using his old tactic of silence against me again. When we had occasional arguments in our younger years, he would do the same, saying nothing and subjecting me to emotional coldness. You've schemed for over 20 years, turning my daughter into a fool, leaving all the property to you and your sister-in-law's daughter. Since that's the case, why do you think I would ever forgive you, Eric? Eric closed his eyes, his expression pained. Nancy, please, for the sake of the fact that I'm about to die, why did you treat me this way? I interrupted him. Back then, I clearly asked for your opinion. I said if you couldn't accept the child, we could either not get married or have an abortion. It was you who agreed to let me give birth to her. Eric didn't answer my question, only persistently hoping to receive my forgiveness. He said he was about to die, and if I didn't forgive him, he would die with his eyes open. Those things have already been done, so why fear dying with eyes open? I asked him, Eric, if I were the one who switched the children, would you forgive me? Eric's murky gaze fell upon me, and he gave his answer almost without hesitation. Yes, Nancy, I know I've wronged you in this lifetime, and no matter what you do, I will forgive you. With those words from him, I felt reassured. I forced out a cold smile. Sarah's high fever when she was 6 years old, it could have been cured, right? Because Linda always believed that Sarah was my daughter. She didn't take her to the hospital in time. She would have been more than happy for Sarah to die. Later, the doctor said that if Sarah underwent rehabilitation treatment, there was a high chance she could live independently in the future. At that time, both Eric and I were present, and Linda even asked for Eric's opinion. What did Eric say? Eric showed a reluctant expression but said, If she can't recover to be a normal person, then there's no need to waste time and money. All of this is this child's fate. They believed Sarah was my child. And when the child turned out to be disabled, they said it was all fate. But what if Sarah had been their child all along? Outside the door, the sound of the caregiver talking to someone could be heard. It seemed someone had arrived. But they hesitated to come in. I looked at Eric, trying to see through his appearance and understand what was really going on in his mind. Eric, back when you said you wanted to marry me, I actually thought a lot about it. I felt that if you were truly good to me, I would definitely make a good life with you. And that's exactly how it turned out. I was never afraid of hardship. Even though Eric's family was so poor, I still managed to support him and get through it step by step. Eric lowered his head, his face so thin it was almost nothing but bones, and no expression could be discerned. But you schemed against me, time and again, not even sparing my child. I stabbed straight into his heart with every word. Eric, I raised Susan for over 20 years, while Linda never raised her at all. Have you ever considered that if she doesn't acknowledge Linda and only recognizes me as her mother? Eric looked up at me calmly. Nancy, you'll probably scold me for saying this, but Susan is Linda's and my biological daughter. She carries our blood, and we are inherently close. He said. Linda already told Susan. They recognized each other as mother and daughter back when Susan was in her second year of high school. As soon as his words fell, the door to the hospital room was pushed open, and Linda, who had been eavesdropping outside long enough, walked into the room. Nancy, she said with a victorious smile on her face, since you already know everything, it's time to return my daughter Susan to me. Of course, you can take your little fool with you anytime. Seeing that I remained silent, she continued, raising her all these years has been no small burden. You know, a fool is much harder to care for than a normal person. She looked at me as if I were a fool. For so many years, that's how she had always seen me, but only I knew who the real fool was. Living among them, I had the illusion that the whole world was drunk while I alone remained sober. So I endured them again and again, knowing that only by letting them act arrogantly could I have the last laugh. But now, there is no longer any need to endure. I asked them, you've always said that Susan is your biological daughter, but have you ever done a paternity test? Eric and Linda were taken aback. Linda looked disdainful and said, when Eric brought the child over, I was there too. What's the point of doing a test? I believe one should not leave this world with regrets. Especially Eric, after all, we were once husband and wife. So, I took out the copy of the paternity test that I always carry in my bag, tossing one to Linda and the other to Eric. What is this? Linda casually flipped through it, but upon seeing Susan's name, she was filled with disbelief and immediately turned to the last page. How is this possible? The paternity test results for Susan and me indicated a biological parent-child relationship. I kindly explained to them, when Susan was 12, I already took her to do a paternity test. What? Haven't you done a paternity test with Sarah? Eric was also stunned. His muddled mind couldn't process it for a long time, and he just murmured, I clearly swapped the children. He did swap the children, but later, I swapped them back. How could I not be wary of a man who was involved with his sister-in-law even before marriage? After learning that he married me just to cover up his dirty affairs with my sister-in-law, I started guarding against both of them. Looking at the two people in front of me, who were so shocked they were almost dumbfounded, I continued to twist the knife in their hearts. You two are truly heartless, treating your own daughter like that. How does it feel to turn your own child into a fool? If Linda had treated Sarah well, how could a perfectly fine young girl like Sarah have become a fool? At first, when I saw how they treated Sarah, I couldn't help but feel pity. But later, when I realized they treated her that way because they thought she was my daughter, I immediately withdrew all my sympathy. To be merciful to the enemy is to be cruel to oneself. Eric's last ounce of energy finally ran out. He lay slumped on the hospital bed, his eyes wide open, with only his final breath remaining. I was somewhat puzzled. Weren't you just apologizing for what you did to me? You even said you were willing to spend your next life making it up to me. Now you don't have to apologize anymore. And you don't owe me anything. Aren't you happy? And besides, I just asked you if I were the one who switched the children. You said you would forgive me. You even said you would forgive me no matter what I did. Eric could no longer speak. His eyes had lost focus, fixed on a void. Only his lips still quivered, as if murmuring something. Linda finally snapped back to reality. She threw herself in front of Eric, gripping the front of his hospital gown with both hands. In her panic, her words came out in a jumble. Eric, the will. Redo it. Lawyer Carl. Yes. Contact Lawyer Carl first. She fumbled around, searching for her phone to make the call, watching the pupils in Eric's eyes gradually dilate. I spoke the final words I had prepared for him. A person cannot do too many bad deeds. They will face retribution. When Bruce arrived at the hospital with Lawyer Carl, Eric had already taken his last breath. His eyes were wide open, and no matter how many times I tried, I couldn't close them. Just as he had said, if I didn't forgive him, he would never rest in peace. I suppose he didn't need my forgiveness after all. Linda gave a somewhat incoherent explanation of what had happened to Lawyer Carl, who then asked for more details and even reviewed the paternity test report I had given Linda. He pushed his glasses up on the bridge of his nose and said, "This appraisal report is genuine. If what you said is true, then the will took effect the moment the natural person made it. Now that the natural person has passed away, the will cannot be altered." Linda's voice cracked with despair. But she's not his biological daughter. My daughter is his real child. How can the inheritance go to an outsider? Attorney Carl still shook his head. According to Article 1133 of the Civil Code of the People's Republic of China, a natural person may, in accordance with the provisions of this law, make a will to dispose of personal property and may designate an executor of the will. A natural person may make a will to designate one or more of the statutory heirs to inherit personal property. A natural person may make a will to donate personal property to the state, a collective, or an organization or individual other than the statutory heirs. A natural person may establish a testamentary trust in accordance with the law. He continued to explain. Article 1127 states that the first order of heirs includes the spouse, children, and parents. This means that, in the absence of a will specifying otherwise, both the spouse and children are entitled to inherit the estate. However, once Eric has made a will and clearly designated Susan as the heir, the estate will be distributed according to the will's provisions, rather than following the statutory order of inheritance. Therefore, it is possible to leave the inheritance only to the children and not to the spouse by making a will. That is to say, if there had been no will back then, Linda could have completely used the paternity test report between Sarah and Eric to claim a share of the inheritance. Back then, she was in a hurry to have Eric make a will because she was afraid that half of the property would be taken by me, the spouse. Actually, I don't really care about Eric's wealth. I've been working all these years, and my salary is more than enough to support both myself and Susan. But who would turn down something that comes for free? She schemed and plotted, only to end up with nothing, while I, who schemed nothing, gained everything. Upon learning that Linda had not obtained Eric's assets, Bruce's expression turned sour as he cursed at Linda several times before storming off in anger. He was with Linda because he had his eye on Eric's inheritance. Now that there's no hope, he doesn't want to keep up the act for even a second. Linda still refused to believe it. She had been arrogant and domineering in front of me for most of her life, and she couldn't accept that all the good fortune had suddenly fallen into my lap after Eric's death. In truth, what she found hardest to accept was that Sarah was truly her daughter. After all, no one knew better than her how she had treated Sarah over the past 20 years. She insisted on finding Susan, convinced that my paternity test was fake, and demanded to have a DNA test done with Susan. Susan had no objections to this. Her attitude toward Linda remained gentle. "Auntie, you can arrange it. I'm free anytime these days." Linda almost couldn't wait to drag Susan to the hospital. With an expedited paternity test, the results would be available within 24 hours. Linda was the type who wouldn't give up until she hit a wall. After receiving the paternity test report, she finally gave up completely. She had schemed and plotted for half a lifetime, only to end up paving the way for us, the mother and daughter. She was so furious that she was directly admitted to the hospital. I heard she still had debts to pay outside. Originally, she had planned to coax Susan into using part of the inheritance to settle them once it was in hand. But now everything had fallen through. It's not that Susan has a strong ability to accept things. I told her the whole truth when she was 12 years old. I raised her with my own hands, and the resilience I instilled in her countless times finally came in handy this time. I have to admit that Eric has always been very good to Susan, though it's highly likely that this kindness stems from his belief that she is his biological daughter. So, at first, Susan found it somewhat difficult to accept, and she remained in low spirits for a long time. But after understanding Eric and Linda's schemes against me, Susan still chose to side with me. She said, "Mom, you haven't done anything wrong. They shouldn't treat you like this." In the year Susan was in her first year of high school, Linda secretly started contacting her. Just as I suspected, Linda believed that Susan was her biological daughter, and now that Susan was old enough, she wanted to reclaim her. Every time Linda contacted Susan, she would tell me. Sometimes Susan couldn't understand it either, and she would ask me, "Mom, why didn't Dad marry Auntie back then?" I had thought about this before. After his brother died, he could have married his sister-in-law. Although such things were rare, they were not unheard of. It was only later that I figured it out, because he couldn't bear the gossip from the villagers, and also, he wasn't as satisfied with Linda as he had imagined. Eric is actually a coward at heart, which is evident from his family's destitute situation. A grown man should be able to carve out a path for himself no matter where he goes. Yet he is content with the status quo. In fact, there is another reason why Eric didn't marry Linda. Back then, Eric's mother also disliked Linda. Her eldest son was doing perfectly fine as a carpenter, but because Linda complained about his low earnings and constantly argued with him, she ended up pushing him into mining. Eric's mother said the exact same thing as my ex-mother-in-law. She claimed that Linda brings misfortune to her husband. Many women lost their husbands in that mining disaster, and many of the widows were burdened with the label of being husband killers. These burdens were imposed by one woman upon another. The overwhelming, pent-up emotions had to find an outlet. Right and wrong, black and white, there is nothing left to say. Eric's mother didn't like me either, especially after learning I was pregnant. She looked down on me and bluntly said I had to abort the child before I could enter her family's door. Later, I don't know what Eric said to her, but she never brought up the abortion again. She only told me to have this child quickly and then hurry up and have another one that was Eric's biological child. Unfortunately, my child was born just as the one-child policy was implemented, and each family was only allowed to have one child. At that time, Eric said he would treat my child as his own. Back then, I was genuinely moved for a moment, and I truly felt fortunate that, no matter when, I never let love cloud my judgment. On the day I gave birth, Linda fell in the courtyard, and the child in her womb, though not yet full term but long claimed to be, was finally about to be born. Linda and I gave birth in the same hospital. At the time, I became wary. Linda's fall seemed quite suspicious, and I felt as though she had deliberately waited to give birth on the same day as me. I have always trusted my intuition, so I remained vigilant at all times. After giving birth, even though I was so exhausted that I could barely keep my eyes open, I bit the tip of my tongue to stay awake. I carefully examined the baby, and only after spotting a red birthmark behind her earlobe did I allow myself to fall into a deep sleep. As I had expected, when I woke up, Eric cheerfully placed the baby in my arms. Newborns all have wrinkled little faces and look quite similar. While Eric wasn't paying attention, I took a look at the baby's ear. There was no birthmark behind the baby's ear. At that moment, I began to doubt myself. Was the memory of the birthmark behind the baby's earlobe just a dream I had? Fortunately, I am not someone who dwells on internal conflicts. Since doubts had arisen, I decided to verify them. Enduring the pain, I asked Eric to hold the child and said I wanted to see my sister-in-law. Eric was somewhat reluctant, but he ultimately had to care for 2 postpartum women at the same time. His sister-in-law's side also couldn't do without him. In those days, giving birth usually meant staying in the hospital for just 1 day before going home. If my child had truly been swapped, I needed to get them back before leaving the hospital. In those days, surveillance cameras were a rare sight. After confirming that Linda's child indeed had a red birthmark behind the ear, I began planning how to swap the children back. There was only one opportunity to swap the children back, and that was when we were heading home together. While Eric was helping Linda out the door and into the car, I used the fastest speed I could muster in my life to switch the 2 babies' blankets. Linda still refused to give up. She sued me, determined to reclaim the property Eric had left behind. I had Eric's will in my hands. How could she possibly succeed in her lawsuit? Moreover, Eric and Sarah have never undergone a paternity test. Later, she started playing the victim card, repeatedly coming to my house to cry and complain, saying that raising Sarah was difficult for her and that she needed money to treat Sarah's illness. But Sarah's illness had already been delayed by her. One day, Susan read a book and joked with a smile, "Mom, you told Dad everything before he died. Aren't you afraid he might be reborn and come back to take revenge on you? How could there possibly be rebirth in this world? Even if such a good thing existed, it shouldn't fall upon those foolish people. Even if he is reborn, with the memories of an extra lifetime, I might still be a match for him. A mind as deep as the sea will eventually drown in its own depths. Better to be honest with each other and walk together into the sunlight."